Member Larwood.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chancellor, Senator, for your report. I wondered if you could give an update. The original governor's proposal, there was a swap of gas tax for an excise tax that was designed to impact Proposition 98 and to lower it. Where did that all go? What happened to that?
Yeah, there was a lot of complex twists and turns there. So essentially, to begin with, the governor's proposal, and I could dig out the specific numbers, I don't have them in the front of my head, was to eliminate the sales tax on gasoline and replace that with an excise tax to generate a like amount of revenues. It was kind of a complex switch out. It affected other agencies in different ways, but for us, the main impact was sales taxes are counted towards calculating the Proposition 98 minimum guarantee, whereas excise taxes are not. So it made it look like, for Prop 98 purposes, it made it look like the state got a little poorer, and that would drop the guarantee down. It was kind of a clever move in that way, and that met a lot of opposition, especially from the education community. So, but the last that I saw of that bill is that it was modified heavily in the legislature, and they attached some type of intent language that the reduction would not be used to drive down Prop 98 funding, and that's the version that was on its way to the governor the last time I checked. Now the intent language obviously is only that. It doesn't have the force of real law behind it. But that's the update. It's kind of characteristic of some of the very complex twists and turns that have been introduced in the budget. I don't know if any of you had the chance to read the Sacramento Bee article this morning about taxes and fees. But it just talks about how on the margin, this whole budget debate this year is going to be waged on very technical levels, and it's an interesting piece that gets into the nuances of what is a fee and what is a tax. Mm-hmm. A tax takes a 2/3 vote, a fee doesn't, and you basically got a bunch of lawyers arguing with each other about the kind of the fringe of these issues, and I think the gas tax swap was along those lines.
But you say that gas tax has been through the Assembly and is on the way to the governor? Is that what you said?
I could check on this because I was pretty caught up on that deferral bill. But the last I heard, it was on its way. That the Assembly was going to pass the bill. It looked like they had the votes. And but if you want, I could. Why don't I could check.
I think it did pass the Assembly last week, but it hasn't passed the Senate.
Okay.
I think.
6, I think. 6 or 8x6. I can check. It also got held up because at one point the legislature was going to stick in some provisions that would have closed some tax loopholes, and the governor expressed his displeasure with those provisions. So we'll check on it and get to you here.
Typically, there would be a lot of pushback on that bill from cities and counties because that tax, the gas tax, still went to cities and counties for their transportation needs.
Right, and that's why I think my husband has talked about that bill to me. So that's why I'm not quite sure. I don't think it got voted on in the Senate yet.
Okay, it might have got held up. The legislature started with about $6 billion worth of special session proposals, and I think it got whittled down to about maybe $2.5 billion by the end of it. So I think Marlene's checking on the bill, and we'll get back to you on it.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Member McDougall and Member Haley.
Thank you. I was just wondering about what seems to be an astronomical proposal on increasing student fees, and whether there's what's the tenor in the legislature as far as student fees go. I mean, I would hope there wouldn't be much of a response to that as a realistic proposal, but what is the situation?
Right. Well, I think the situation is that you'll get very different opinions in different corners of the Capitol. I think that last year, during the severe, when it became clear how severe the budget outcomes were going to be for the colleges, a lot of the anti-fee increase viewpoint became more muted. And for me, that was the notable feature of last year, where all of a sudden you heard community college advocates who would have been 100% against a fee increase and would have been actually proposing reductions in fees, all of a sudden saying, well, you know what, if it's moderate and if the money stays with the colleges, we might have to live with a fee increase. So I'm just saying, I think the whole conversation has shifted a little bit away from the no fees. Now, I think what's going to happen, this proposal, that's a drastic increase, 53%. I think it's really going to test kind of where people are on that, especially on top of the 30% increase that we saw last year. It's a cumulative effect. And so my guess is probably this fee increase is beyond the threshold that the legislature is willing to adopt, but I don't know how high they would go. And you will get some parties in the legislature will say, you know what, this is still a good deal for students if you look at it in the big scheme of things. And if the alternative is closing the door on more students or cutting services more, then maybe the fee increase is the lesser of two evils. So it's, that's my best job. Chancellor Scott spends a lot of time in the building too, and other people do as well. So I don't know if other people have opinions on that.
Well, I'll comment right now. Last year, when I was testifying in front of the Budget Committee, they asked me directly about fees. And I said, well, under two conditions. One is that it's moderate, and two is that all the money goes back to the college. Now, that's what happened. Maybe when you say, well, going from $20 to $26 is not exactly moderate, but percentage-wise it's rather high, but dollar-wise it's not a lot, $6. And you have to remember that at one time it was $26.
That's right.
It was $26, then it went down to $20, and now it's back up to $26. Some conversation is around $30, Peter, but I think most of the community college community would resist this particular proposal of $40. There would probably be some who would say, no, don't raise it at all, and others who would say, if we get to keep the money, since 40% of our students are on BOG waivers, which means that they don't have to pay, that we perhaps could take a $30 fee, and those who aren't on BOG waivers, some of them get Pell Grants. So it's a tough issue. We are, incidentally, fortunate for California, we have the lowest community college fee in the nation. And that's one of the reasons we have the highest participation rate. We have a 10% participation rate, which is higher. Wyoming, which is a very small state, has the same participation rate. But otherwise, we have the greatest, the percentage of students that are enrolled in our community college compared to our population is extremely high, which is something we're very proud of. About 70% of all undergraduates in California are in community colleges. So our participation rate may go down slightly since our enrollment looks like it's going to go down about 1%. However, I'm hopeful that, and I'm not picking on adults compared to young people, but we are trying to say if you're going to cut courses, the ones that are avocational in nature should be the ones you cut, not the ones that are transfer, career technical, basic skills. So that's kind of just an impression I'm giving you about what I hear. I know CCLC is talking about maybe are they looking at something a little complicated, but about $30. Mm-hmm. And so I can just tell you that that's maybe, of course, in the best of times, we would wish the fees not go up at all. But this is not the best of times.
Member Larwood and Member Price.
Just to follow up on the fee issue, my recollection is correct, and a lot of people weren't here at that time, but this body went on record as saying moderate and predictable.
Right.
fees is what we would accept, rather than have big swings.
Yes.
And that's never been defined as to what moderate and predictable is. But, you know, students, if they know that it's gonna go up by a small amount, can plan for that. If you know, if you get these big surprises, you can't plan for that.
Well, at one time, we had hoped for, you know, keep the fees in line with CPI, Consumer Price Index.
Right.
But most governors will tend to veto that because they frankly like to maintain some discretion. And I remember once carrying a bill that would guarantee the community colleges getting 11% of Prop 98, and it got to the governor and he vetoed it. And because they don't like to have their hands tied.
I'm sorry, did I mention so? Member Price and then Member Reed.
I think the fee increases, especially at this time, is a really, it's hard enough for students to get into the classes with the cuts to classes, and it's going to be even harder to have to pay these fees. Granted, there are a lot of people that get the BOG waiver, a lot of people that get Pell Grants, but there's a lot that don't. I don't think the students are gonna support this. I know the Student Senate opposes fee increases anytime they come up, and I think it's not a good time to even consider it.
Thank you. Member Reed?
I wanted to shift just for a moment. I looked at the Kern district where I live, and they're looking out as many as 3 years out and how they're going to finance shortfalls and the like. I'm concerned about these small colleges that we have in our system and how they're going to meet a budget shortfalls going forward, and our responsibilities through your service to help monitor that and to help advise them how to get through these times. Mm-hmm. Have you been noticed by any districts to this point that they're not going to make it, or that they've had to seek alternative financing like the banks to meet their budget shortfalls?
We have not been contacted by any districts saying that they're in imminent fiscal danger. I think most districts, if not all districts, are doing some type of external borrowing, whether it be a trans or temporary loans from a county or other. And you know, with each of those types of borrowing, there's an interest cost. And you know, that's in addition to all the internal borrowing that districts do, where temporarily they borrow money from a bookstore account or you know, another internal fund. But no, at this point, no districts have indicated an imminent threat. And I actually have been having a fair amount of back and forth with the districts around this deferral bill. I've been talking with their CBOs to determine who would be put in imminent danger by this proposal. And I think I mentioned before we would have some limited ability to fund districts that were having more serious problems. And so I put out the word that if they're anticipating significant problems, they need to let us know right away. So far, you know, that notice just went out. But so far, luckily, I haven't received any, you know, frightened phone calls. I think between the budget cuts, though, and all the deferrals that are going on, I think you're right to be concerned. I know I am. And I think the smallest districts tend to operate closest to the margin and are at the greatest risk. So, yeah, I think your concerns are merited. Thankfully, so far, none of those phone calls have come in.
Member Ramos?
Yeah, I think Member Reed is on the same page as I am. I mean, this is obviously a dire situation, but I'm just wondering in terms of what we might be able to do in relationship to some of these issues that you just raised. Is it possible that we can gain some economies by negotiating with some of the major banks in the state on a statewide basis to be able to provide lines of credit for some of the more at-risk institutions should we see an emergence of a cluster of those groups come forward? It seems that asking them to go out sort of, you know, piecemeal on their own is probably a sort of uneconomical, more expensive way to proceed. Now, I don't even know if the concept that I'm proposing is economically viable or profitably viable from a banking standpoint, but it seems to me that might be something worth exploring as a contingency. Just food for thought. you have a thought on that?
I do. I think the closest thing I could, I think really in a lot of ways what you're describing is what they call a tax revenue anticipation note, or a trans, and where districts can borrow against a future stream of payments that are going to be coming in. And many of our districts currently participate in those trans programs. There's one that's operated by the League, Community College League of California, and I think there are a couple other groups of districts that band together, and I think in the case of LA, they just go out on their own. But you're right. I think there is an economy of scale that occurs, and there may be potentials to build out on that further. I think it's a developing industry, or developing reality right now. Districts are, 15 years ago, districts didn't have to borrow the way they do now. The state's been disrupting the flow of cash so much, and cutting districts' budgets to the point where they're operating on the margin, that's really required more of this kind of borrowing. And the last thing I'd say is that in a lot of ways, the ultimate solution to this would be for the state to do the borrowing centrally. And that's a point that we've made, is it doesn't make any sense to start deferring our payments, because it's going to cost our districts a lot more to hire lawyers and to go through all the transaction costs around these trans. It would be much more cost effective for the state, instead of playing all these games, just to take care of business up here and act like adults and balance the budget.
Well,
I agree, but if they're not prepared to do that, which it looks like they're not,
That would
they
be
have to have
something different.
a contingency. So I think we're on the same page. The more coordinated, the more comprehensive, and statewide the intervention, I think the better off we would all be, just in terms of rationality in the system and responsiveness on our part to the institutions that we're concerned about.
Thank you. Member Lockyer, then Member Baum, and Member Perez.
So it is my understanding that the state treasurer's office, bless his heart, that there's a I'm not that knowledgeable on this, that there is an emergency grievance process for the deferred payments, and so I'm wondering, is there more information about the criteria? Has anybody needed to do that? It sounds like nobody has, but with knowing the criteria, if colleges would qualify, maybe it's through that what you're talking about could happen. So are you aware of the criteria for the emergency grievance?
We've been told that was being negotiated. We haven't seen the specific language around it.
Okay.
But in anticipation that it might be there, that's why I sent an email out to the CBOs saying, if you are in imminent danger because of this deferral, and I asked them to analyze it based on that a deferral that we repaid April 6th. I said, if you're having a crisis, under those terms, contact us right away. That notice went out Friday, and so far, I think folks are still looking at their numbers. I haven't heard back, but we hope that measure, or that exemption process is included, and it won't actually be included in our understanding is that they'll pass some type of cleanup legislation next week that would address some of these concerns. So that's what we're keeping an eye to.
Thank you. Member Baum?
Just very quickly, just to respond to my colleague's point too, the trans system has been working, at least for my district. We work through the County of Los Angeles's pool, and the rates are very, very favorable, to the extent that when we take the funds, we can deposit them and make an even swap in the cost. So it's a net wash for us. But should we draw on it and then not get the funds back from the state in a timely fashion, then we would incur some costs that would be unfortunate.
Interesting. Member Perez?
I'm just going to go out on a limb here, but I think that, we're not going to see relief in the near future, and I think we can pretty much guarantee that over the next couple of years it's going to continue as it is today. And I think an opportunity that we have to take a true leadership role is to look at two opportunities of cost, that if we can negotiate a cost savings, perhaps that savings can come back to the community college district to use to fund their programs. One of them is admissions. If we were to streamline admissions from a state level instead of having it done at an individual level, there's opportunity for cost savings there. The other one is the negotiation of medical premiums. Each individual college is doing that, which is a tremendous cost. And if we did it at a state level, there's another opportunity there. So I just think, from a board's perspective, we can continue to try to find ways to lift rocks, to try to find additional funding or to try to stretch funding. But I really think there's opportunities for us to take a leadership role in trying to bring groups together to talk about overall cost savings mechanisms that have sustainable results and negotiate with that if we do have some savings, that money that's saved comes back to the systems to be used to serve our students.
Are those options?
And I'm sorry, I didn't hear, the first one was streamlining the
The admission?
admissions?
Right, so instead of doing it on an individual, bring it up to a state level, like what the regents and the UCs are doing. And then the other one, in talking with several presidents at local colleges, what I was informed is that they negotiate their medical on individual basis. And there's a lot of opportunity to have better premiums if you did it at a state level and a lower cost to provide the medical services as a state level than if you're doing it at the individual level. And so those might be two opportunities that we could take a leadership role to look at, starting discussions and dialogue around that to see if there's consensus to lead those efforts.
Well, I'm not aware of any ongoing conversations on those topics, but I'd be more than happy to try to engage some folks, including the chief business officers, at their board meeting and pursue those options and come back with some feedback.
Now, when you talk about admissions, I have asked Vice Chancellor Perry, and there is a statewide admission form that 100 colleges use. Were you thinking of a form or
I'm
a
thinking of
process?
Process. So
Okay.
my understanding is the UCs and the regents use one process that everybody utilizes that's more cost-effective than our process that's administered at each individual college level. So if we were to look at theirs as a model of success and see if there's a way to duplicate that in our current systems today, there is potential cost savings associated with that. Obviously, it takes everybody to agree to that, but to me, the caveat is that, when Paul Navarro came out and talked to the CPEC board and we talked about some of this stuff, when I proposed this, the caveat was that any savings stays with the system, that they don't get penalized and that savings goes away. They get to use that money now to fund the different programs.
Do you know much about this, Chancellor
Well,
Scott?
first, there are several issues here, and of course, at times we've thought about doing things on a system-wide basis. Let it be known, though, that unlike either CSU or UC, we are not centralized. In other words, we'll say the chancellor's office at CSU can hand down a directive to all the 23 CSUs, and it's operative. I would simply be making a statement, and that's about where it would go, because each college is controlled by a local board of trustees. So so we have there've been all kinds of discussions about system-wide, and we'd like to work in some cases on a system-wide basis. Now, on admissions, we admit any high school graduate, so we don't have the same problems of admissions that is typical of either CSU or UC, who have to, like UC admits the top 12.5%, and sometimes they don't admit them to, say, Berkeley or UCLA, but they say you're admitted to UC Riverside. So number one, we admit everyone. So the real question is they show up, and as I said, our problem is not admitting people. Our problem is once they're admitted for them to find classes. Now they have to go through an admissions process because we have such things as we charge out-of-state tuition in case they're not an in-state resident. And if they don't have a high school diploma, then we have to make a determination as to whether or not we think they would profit from admission to a community college. And we can rule out someone who we believe, let's say someone with a severe mental disability, we might consider that they just wouldn't profit from our from an admitting to that. I've even heard it talked about statewide collective bargaining, but that, of course, is a real can of worms, because for one thing, we have all kinds of different benefits at different colleges, and once you start talking about that, suddenly it'd be real neat for everybody to go up to the highest level, but people wouldn't be very interested, particularly if they were above the median of going to the median level. So that's kind of, and the health benefit, I think, has some possibilities. We could discuss that, and it'd have to be voluntary, but on the other hand, we might be able to get a break. But once again, I will tell you that community colleges differ. Some of them require more of an individual participation than others.
Very much so.
When I was at Pasadena City College, for instance, at that time, they provided full health benefits for a person and his or her family. Then I think they eventually had to move a little bit to making contributions. They still don't, huh?
No contribution.
No contribution. Well, that's a wonderful benefit. But I would say the Los Angeles Community College District furnishes lifetime benefits. That's a very expensive item, I might add, and a lot of community colleges have decided they couldn't afford that. And frankly, there was a district in the central part of the state, a K through 12 district, that provided lifetime benefits for a person and his or her spouse. That district is on the verge of bankruptcy, I might add, because those things are terribly expensive. So I guess I've posed more questions than I've posed answers. I think the health benefit, we could explore that. That's a possibility. And then, of course, if we were to negotiate a certain health benefit that, say, if we could get, say, 30 or 40 community college districts to participate in, we probably would have a break. But I sometimes say that the strength of community colleges is our weakness. Our strength is we can respond to a community on a community basis. The weakness is that therefore we can't act in concert because we are individually governed. You have a board of trustees at CSU or a board of regents at the University of California. They don't have individual boards at their separate institutions. We do. And so I don't know. Have you given any thought to the idea of a health benefit, or whether or not there would be enough participation that we could do that?
No, I really haven't. I do think, though, if I go back and talk to the board of the chief business officers, there's a lot of experience on that board, and you know the old adage that no idea is new. I'm sure this had been floated at some point, and it would be interesting to see what's happened and perhaps what exists out there now. But yeah, it strikes me that some of the issues that you raised, Chancellor, might be able to be resolved by having a menu where a district could choose its level on the plan. And the other idea that comes to my mind is that the easiest way to accomplish this may be just to negotiate access on the part of the colleges to somebody else's existing plan, something under PERS or something under some larger system. That could be a win-win because we'd be increasing their buying power even more and providing access to that pool to our district. So I'd be more than willing to take that forward.
And I just want to say, I understand that we don't govern the same way, but to me, here's an opportunity to look at things differently and to start dialogue and have those discussions. And if we're successful and we can find cost savings and keep that, to allocate that back to the system, to me, that's a win-win for all.
Well, that's why I'm going to that purchasing agent meeting next month. And of course, we are doing some, we've done some work on computers and other things in which we've done some large purchasing. But it would have been wonderful if somebody had the foresight 25 or 30 years ago to say we will have a common computer system throughout community colleges. But to get there from the position we're in now would be almost impossible. It's like an old farmer once said how do you define status quo? He said, that's Latin for the mess we're in.
Well, on that note, I just wanted to say it probably was thought about in the past, but things have changed. There's less health insurance companies in our state than there were like 20 years ago, and everybody is afraid of the large increases that may be coming in the near future. So it might be a good time to do it. And Kaiser Permanente put everybody on one computer system. It does take a lot of money, but it can be done. So if we're big enough and we can do it, you can do it. But it does take a financial
Now,
investment.
I know some districts, by the way, you speak of Kaiser, who will furnish Kaiser free. But if you get a more expensive PPO, you have to pay. You have to pay the difference.
Right.
Because Kaiser is less expensive than many of the PPOs.
Right. So it might be a good time for it. Okay, I'm going to go around. Member Reed and Member McDougall.
You know, I realize, Eric, that you have a very difficult position, you know, in trying to balance all this. But we talked oftentimes on this board about strategic planning and long-term planning. And I'm just wondering, in working with the governor's office and the LAO and the like, that do we see any real long-term, and even 2 or 3 years out, do we ever look at a 2-year budget like some forms of government do, where we can stop this constant crisis management, where we're always pitting ourselves in this you know, very unfortunate position? I mean, do we see any leadership coming from anywhere to give us some hope that it's not a matter of just coming out of this crisis? It's like, where are we going to go from here? Is what I'm concerned about. And I don't see this ending like Alice just said. I don't see this ending anytime soon. I think this is with us for a while. And where's the leadership coming so that we're not back at the table with $60 tuition and $100 tuition that I've heard? I mean,
Yeah,
what can we do to do something?
right. I mean, if the question is leadership on the overall kind of the state budget, unfortunately, I think everybody at the highest levels even they're in a very reactive mode. They're reacting to the latest set of numbers. I mean, the fact that the state is telling us that they can't even make their March payment to the community colleges shows you how poor the planning is, and they're reacting to the crisis, and so unfortunately I can't point to examples of leadership around longer term fiscal strategy. I mean, really at its core, the state leaders for the better part of a decade have allowed the structural imbalance to form in our state budget, where they're not bringing the spending on programs, they're not bringing the kind of the desire for services into alignment with available resources. And that structural imbalance between those two things reflects really, irresponsibility. If any of us were operating that way with our own finances, we'd go bankrupt at some point. And state leaders, this is why maybe I got a little bit too emotional a minute ago at saying how they should act like adults, but fundamentally, that's the problem we're dealing with, is how do you bring those the revenues into alignment with the services, and I don't think anybody's really thinking long term there, unfortunately, and that's disappointing as a Californian. So.
Member
can I make-
McDougall.
My question's somewhat in a different direction, but how many of our districts are basic aid districts? And over the last couple of years in this crisis, has there been an increase, decrease, or have things stayed the same in terms of the number of basic aid districts?
We have 3 basic aid districts.
Just 3?
And it has been pretty stable. And there's some technical sides to that issue, but that's the short answer to the question. And at some point, if the cuts became severe enough, we might see more basic aid districts. So far, we haven't hit that point.
Member Lockyer.
Well, a couple of points. Even though this is a much smaller scale of a model, but with Board Member Perez's comments, county firefighter issues versus a local city fire department are, there's negotiations all over the state with those matters. And a cost model that they use is the local station pays for, they keep the apparatus, the trucks, the actual facility, and the shared cost funding goes into a pool for overhead, overtime, insurance, and even some energy costs. And they then pay just the percentage of the services, and significant cost savings have occurred. So that's just a model. I could connect you with somebody who could explain it much better than I just did.
Sure.
Another thing, in terms of the state leadership, I do know the state treasurer's office had created about a 20-page report that had all sources of revenue, all sources of costs, and then recommendations that was issued about 3 years ago. And I think only one legislator actually met with him with regards to that. But that's a really comprehensive report that just I wanted to put that out there, that that's a model and a good source of information.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you, board members. I was going to wrap it up anyway at this point. Thank you.
And I'll just allude to the last item, which are the surveys from the districts. And so you have that maybe that'd be some good airplane reading for you. And I could provide a little bit of the just high level. It backs up what Chancellor Scott and many of you have been talking about during today's meeting and yesterday's retreat. And what we're seeing from those surveys, there are actually only 4 surveys. I think the cover memo says 5. We were hoping to add a 5th one, but it hasn't been tabulated yet. But the 4 surveys, 1 was done by the CBOs, 3 were done by the CIOs, the instructional officers. And the big picture, what they indicate are that districts are cutting a lot of course sections. 90% are cutting course sections. 61% are cutting 5% or more. And we have some districts that are cutting 15%, and a couple that are even cutting 20%. So a lot of course sections being cut, obviously with adjunct faculty losing employment in that process. With the severe cuts to the categorical programs, we're seeing reduced levels of services for students. That translates into jobs of counselors and tutors folks are losing employment there. And I think on the categoricals, we're probably not even kind of beginning to see the full impacts of those deep, those 43% budget cuts that Jose talked about, Vice Chancellor Mion talked about earlier. Most districts are spending reserves. 24% are 70%. This was back in November. 24% reported spending out of significant levels of their reserves. And 70% of districts reported spending some reserves at that point. I think those numbers are probably increasing as districts get deeper into the year. And those are the big highlights. But they do provide that flavor, of how the state's budget problems and the cuts that we experience in the current year are starting to have real-world impacts on the campuses, and cutting back on access and cutting back on student services.
Thank you for the report.
Can I say something?
Yes.
In my comments the other day, the context had to do with faculty, and I left the impression that generally there were no layoffs. I misspoke. There have been layoffs of classified staff. Particularly, I think, in the categorical programs. I know Manuel Payan from the San Joaquin Delta District indicated that there were a rather large number, and I forgot the exact number, of classified staff that was laid off at San Joaquin Delta College. And in some ways, of course, those people who are part-time faculty think of themselves as being laid off. They don't have a permanent contract. And so, therefore, they were the first ones to, whenever the course sections were cut, because that districts have a obligation to their full-time faculty who are tenured, and they don't have the option of laying them off. They would obviously not employ part-time faculty that they'd employed the year before. When you reduce your course sections by 5%, somebody's not being used. And 95% of the time or more, that's part-time faculty that are just not being used. Some full-time faculty no longer have overloads that they had before, because that's not part of the contractual agreement. Overloads are offered only on the basis of the demand. And unfortunately, I think that what may have happened this year might be accelerated next year because we don't have quite the problem that K through 12 districts do because we do not have nearly as, the K through 12 districts don't have part-time employees, or not nearly as many part-time employees. We have a lot of part-time teachers, and those are people that we can not use from semester to semester because we don't have a contractual agreement. So we don't have to technically lay those people off. You just simply don't renew the contract. But there are classified individuals in different districts that have experienced layoffs, and there's no way for me to, in any sense, predict that won't increase. That's not a pleasant part of this subject, but it does happen.
Jack, I think the other thing that may be happening with full-time faculty is when faculty retire, they may not be filling the positions. So there's a drop-off of full-time faculty by that method, not by the layoff method.
You're exactly right. I remember years ago when we had not as tough a time as this. We got no COLA and no growth, and we made a commitment at the college where I was, we'd have no layoffs, but I made it very clear that when people retired or resigned, that we were not automatically committed to replace them, and that is happening. And the way that the colleges are meeting their full-time faculty obligation, even if the number of the full-time goes down, the percentage goes up of classes taught. But many colleges have expressed to me a serious problem when this turns around as to how they're going to be able to meet that full-time faculty obligation. So that's a discussion that is for another day.
Okay, well, I think we've had lots of good discussion about this, so I will close that item and move on to your next item, item 5.1, 2011-12 capital outlay projects.
All right. Well, this item is a first reading of our plan for capital outlay projects for 2011-12. And Fred Harris sends his regrets for not being here. He's usually the guy who would do the detail on this, and he's out sick today. But the item before you is a first reading, and it. And so I'll start with just providing a quick update of where we are on capital outlay. The 2009-10 Budget Act authorized. We still have 27 projects that are receiving funding based on the 2009-10 spending plan. We've got $194 million that are still going out based on that spending plan. The 2010-11 budget is still in flux, and there are 4 projects that the governor. So the system put forward a total of 80 projects. 4 of those projects were picked up by the governor and included in the governor's budget proposal. Those 4 projects would provide $32 million. Again, at this point, the governor is proposing that those move forward. We still have funding from existing bonds that have already been approved to fund that $32 million, and the LAO did not come in with a recommendation on that, but we're hopeful that we'll be able to move forward on those projects. There are 76 more projects that were part of our 10-11 spending plan that are kind of left in the lurch right now, and we're waiting to see if there is a new state bond that is put forward. At this juncture, nobody has introduced a bond proposal, a 2010 bond, and or a 2012 bond for that matter. And absent those additional resources being available, we wouldn't be able to fund these other 76 projects. So it's in that context that we're bringing before you a new plan that includes a total of 99 additional projects that would be this 2011-12 spending plan, capital outlay spending plan that's before you. That spending plan totals $873 million. And as I mentioned, includes 99 projects, 43 of which are continuing projects, and 56 of which would be new projects. And I think, honestly, we have to say right now that the prospects for a new higher ed cap outlay bond are kind of fair at best. I think the probability has been dropping in recent months, and essentially it comes back to some of the cash flow issues we talked about before, about the state just not being in a position to go forward and sell additional debt. There's already that big water bond proposal is going to put a $11.1 billion bond on the state ballot, and I think state lawmakers and the governor are wary of how the voters would respond to a higher ed bond. So we remain hopeful. I think it's important that we move forward with a set of projects so that we're ready. We're not caught flat-footed, but I think that we've got to keep in mind there's a real level of uncertainty as to whether or not there'll actually be money to fund this in the near term.
Thank you. Vice President Himmelstein.
Eric, just to be clear, of the 99 projects, all of those are either continuing or will be beginning with bonds that have passed by the voters in prior years, such as Prop 1D. All of the 99.
43 would be continuing,
Right.
and 56 would be new. So 56 would be brand new. Yeah.
But you're saying going forward with 56 with dollars from prior bonds. Is that what you're saying? Or you're
No,
saying of the 53 new ones, there's no money to pay for them?
Yeah, for the 2011-12 proposal that's in front of you, 43 are continuing. So 43 have already been started to some extent. The other 56, they haven't even begun the planning process. I mean,
And there's no money identified?
That's
Okay,
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I need.
Yeah.
Okay, on that note.
And again, this is the first reading, a chance for you to have this information digested.
Right, thank you, thank you. Any questions? Member Ramos?
Yeah,
Ramos?
I'd like to raise an admittedly uninformed question, and it's a sensitive question. But in light of the kind of very dire economic realities that we've just discussed, I note that there are multiple, especially in the 2010, 11, and now, budgeting, there are multiple projects which are very significant around sports complex types of investments. And, I don't know the details on any of these, and I'm a huge sports monster. I'm a big sports fan. But in, the context in which we're having the conversation, it just seems to me like I'm wondering, do we need to send some kind of a signal, without being heavy-handed, to our partners on the ground to suggest that, maybe those are not the best kinds of uses, the highest and best uses of our very limited prospective funds going forward. My sense, I'm sure it's shared by many here, if not all, is that we would clearly want to prioritize projects that have a direct bearing on the core mission of these institutions, which is teaching in key fields and applied, education in related fields. So, do we have a position as a board in terms of helping to signal to our partners some priority or some indication that we would like them to align their expectations around capital investment with the hard realities of the times?
Well, we do have a set of, it's a criteria that's used in reviewing applications, project applications that come in from districts, and that, honestly, off the top of my head, I'm not sure to what extent that's been an official action of the board, but definitely as agents, administering the details of the programs for you, we've established these criteria, and they're pretty clear that the first priority is health and safety. The second priority is increasing instructional capacity. These are laid out on page 4.
That last time as well.
Right. Third priority, modernizing existing facilities, and the fourth one being completion of facilities. And I'm not familiar. To really fully answer your question, I want to go back and look at some of the projects with more of a kind of a sports designation. But I think many of those most likely have some instructional features to them. Oftentimes, buildings have a mixed use.
Right.
I see Chancellor Scott.
And I realize that many of these projects create, local jobs and actually maybe have some bearing on training and workforce development issues in those areas. So I don't want to paint with too broad a brush in terms of my concern, but I think you got the gist of where I'm coming
Right,
from.
Yeah.
good observation.
What's at work here.
Chancellor Scott?
This is a very good observation. We do have a distinction that we make in terms of building facilities, and that is the state will finance physical education instruction, but will not finance such things as stadiums, things that are specific. For instance, you can have a track because you use a track in physical education instruction. You can't pay for seats in a stadium with state money. At Pasadena City College, for instance, we paid for an improvement of the stadium with private money that was raised and a scoreboard and things of that nature. So there is a distinction. Now, you know, the line slips a little, I'm sure, that the things that are, you know, like a physical education track that you use for running may also be used for a track meet. But you can't build seats for people to witness that track meet. You've got to do that with private money. So, and parking is not, you know, that's another no-no. Right. Normally, fortunately for parking, you can often use a bond because you charge for the fact that the people park. So there are some lines that are drawn in terms of the use of money. Now, as Vice Chancellor Skinner pointed out, health and safety is first. That is, if you have a building that is unsafe and you can establish it's unsafe, then often that building is torn down and replaced. Instruction, classroom instruction is second. And then some of the other needs of the college, like administrative offices, for instance, would be third. And I'm drawing on my experience that's probably 15 years old, but I do recall that we couldn't finance parking and we couldn't finance athletic facilities that were specifically for intercollegiate athletics. Like probably you could have a locker room for, you know, because you have PE classes in which people have to use a locker room. But if there was something a little fancy that had to do with athletics, you couldn't have that. So I imagine there are colleges that may blur that line a little bit, but I would tell you that there has already been some distinctions drawn, and we have a very careful list of what, and as you can imagine, we used to even get some legislators that get a little active to want to get their college moved up the list, and we've always been very resistant to that. And I think in the last 10 years or so, we've been pretty successful at holding that off, in which you didn't end up having some favoritism shown, that it was made strictly on the basis of the criteria, and then colleges were funded on the basis of that criteria. Now, maybe you can add something to that, and of course, if Fred were here, he could give us some details on that as well.
No, I think you're on target, and what I'd suggest is when this item comes up for the second reading, I'm sure Fred will be here, and I'll give him a heads up that you want to delve into this topic a little bit more. Okay.
Very good, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. I think that is good enough information for us. Is our person named Regina Wilson in the room? No? Okay, she'll be here in a minute probably. 3 of our board members are not going to be with us tomorrow, Alice, Benita, and Jeff. And I wondered if you had any reports to the board, even though I'm taking it out of sequence, that you felt you needed to share with us, important information.
Nothing from me, thank you.
Okay. Jeff?
I just want to, again, I was hoping to go to Washington as well, and I want to thank the Chancellor's Office staff for stopping me from getting on a plane before it was too late, because we were looking forward to a visit, but obviously that was cut short. And so I'm wishing that there's a good trip next week. I won't be able to join, but we'll continue advocacy efforts from Southern California.
Thank you. And Alice, I was wondering, was there a CPEC meeting?
It's coming up next week.
Coming up. Okay, thank you. Is there any new business? Oh, I'm sorry, there's a member of the public. Thank you.
Jane Patton.
Thank you, President Malumed and Chancellor Scott. I was enjoying, I guess enjoying's the word, your conversation about full-time faculty and the challenges when folks retire and not being able to replace them. And I think everyone is sympathetic to the need to postpone some rehiring in this sort of crisis we're in right now. But you may remember in December, I mentioned to you all about the growing trend to rely more and more heavily on adjunct faculty, on part-time faculty. And this is happening in universities and colleges across the country, certainly not just in California. And I mentioned to you that I'd be happy to pull together a few articles, so I've done that, and I've brought you a file of 5 or 6 articles about the relationship of full-time faculty and student success. And I think you'll find this reading to be interesting. They're from a variety of sources. Some of them are more for lay audiences. Some of them are a bit more scholarly. But I think you'll find in there some good rationale and explanation about why, if we are truly committed to student success, and of course we are, we really have to ensure that we don't rely too heavily on part-time faculty, what it does to our institution. For example, full-time faculty are the ones who write new curriculum. They're the ones who do the program review, the self-study. They're the ones who write the student learning outcomes that are necessary for accreditation. They're the ones who have advisory boards with industry to change our curriculum to meet the changing needs of the workplace. They are the ones, most importantly, who regularly meet with students inside and outside class. They spend a whole lot more time with students, and there is a fair amount of research about that, and it's understandable why. There is a close connection between student retention and persistence and how connected they feel to the institution. And that connection is most often through the faculty contact. And it's not going to happen with the part-time faculty who teach a class and then need to go to another job, etc. One of the articles talks about a relationship between adjunct faculty and graduation rates. There actually is some connection that's shown in that one article. We are seeing, of course, with the cancellation of all the classes that we've had to do across the state, that we have improved our full-time, part-time ratio. That's because there are fewer part-time faculty in the state right now. And so that's, in a sense, it's good for the students to be having more classes taught by full-time faculty. But we hope that when we're able to replace classes and put them in the schedule, that we don't overly rely on the adjunct faculty. So I hope you'll find this reading to be useful. Please let me know if I can help further. And I also want to mention that tomorrow I'll bring some brochures about our plenary session, which is in April in San Francisco. It's actually at the same time as the Consultation Council, which is April 15th and 16th. We'd be delighted if any of the board members can come, even if for a few hours. I think you'd find it to be stimulating and entertaining sometimes, and certainly informative to find out some of the issues that we're dealing with in the Academic Senate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing us back this information. There is a woman named Regina Wilson from the state. She's the statewide manager for education and community outreach Census 2010, and she was planning on coming and talking to us during this time, so she may have been delayed a little bit. And she said she was also going to bring her deputy director, Lewis Stewart. So if she comes in the room in the next few minutes, I'll let her speak. Otherwise, she'll probably be here tomorrow. Is there any new business before our board? And I would like to talk, and Jerry, a little bit about tonight. We're having dinner at the Grange.
Sandy arranged, I think it's at the Grange, and I think it starts at
5:30 in the Scandals Bar. 5:30. And the Scandals Bar is, you go up those small stairs in the front desk area off to the right. Is the dinner in the Scandals Bar also? Oh, well, we can start making some Scandals room. Oh, it used to be a bar. There weren't enough scandals, so they made it a room. So that'll be a fun time.
Maybe we can change that.
Not in Sacramento, there weren't too many scandals. Well, okay. Oh, and I'm also mentioning the Classified Employee Awards. People can still be nominated, so they can contact this office. Thank you, and tomorrow morning's meeting is at 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock, thank you.
Just a minute, I'll mention that what's being passed out was actually, I'll have to give credit to the author. Eric Skinner wrote this for me. It's ghost written, in other words. But it tells a little bit, we were asked to give a report to the legislature about the way in which we went about workload reduction. The legislature specifically said when they reduced our workload by 3.34%, they indicated that they preferred that basic skills, career technical education, and transfer education not be reduced. So we can only give them anecdotal information at this time because we don't have the full statistics, but there's an indication that in the state of California that a reduction has largely taken place has taken place a lot among avocational courses, and in some cases, of course, there was no choice. They didn't have that many avocational courses when they reduced their workload by 5 or 10%. But this is the report that went to the legislature today because it was due on March 1st.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, we are adjourned until tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock.